The Elk River had been rising since Tuesday, and by Thursday night it had crossed the road at the bottom of Holler Creek Drive outside Sutton, West Virginia, and the National Weather Service had issued a flash flood emergency for Braxton County, and the sky above the valley had gone the color of a bruise that hadn't finished forming. Sergeant Miles Decker had been driving evacuees out of the hollow for 6 hours when his K9 Bram went stiff in the back seat, ears forward, head canted left, and Miles followed the dog's attention to a house set back from the flooding on a small rise, lights burning in every window. A man standing on the porch in a rain slicker, watching the water climb toward him the way you watch something you have decided not to run from. What that Marine and his K9 discovered inside that house before the night was over would pull a buried truth out of 40 years of silence, a truth that had been sitting in the walls of that hollow like water that had nowhere left to go. If stories like this one matter to you, subscribe before you go any further. This channel is full of them, and you'll want to be here for the next one. Miles Decker had joined the Marine Corps at 21, which was 2 years later than most of the men in his unit, and 2 years after a period of his life he did not discuss in sequence, but sometimes in fragments. Late, when Bram was at his feet and the night was quiet enough that the fragments felt safe to hold, he was from Morgantown, West Virginia, the son of a coal miner who had worked the Consol energy operation outside Fairmont for 31 years, and come home every evening with the particular quietness of a man whose body had spent the day underground and whose spirit took some hours to resurface. Miles had learned a form of patience from his father that he had not recognized as patience until the Corps named it for him. He deployed twice, once to Ramadi and once to Helmand Province, and came back carrying what men carry from those places. Not drama, not trauma in the shape the movies make of it, but a certain difficulty with rooms that had no exit points he'd already mapped, and a preference for open spaces and empty roads. He had taken a position as a volunteer coordinator for disaster relief in central West Virginia, not because it was easy, but because it was useful, and useful was the thing he needed to be. Bram was a German Shepherd, 80 pounds dark sable with a graying muzzle that had started coming in last winter, and which Miles had decided to find distinguished rather than alarming. He had been Miles's partner for 6 years, issued to him in the final year of his second deployment for detection work, and had come home with him without ceremony or official arrangement. The kind of thing that happens in a unit when men who know each other decide something matters more than paperwork. He slept, when he slept, with one ear still tracking. He ate without looking at the bowl. He was not a dog who performed affection. He gave it plainly, directly, without preamble, as a statement of position rather than a request for reciprocation. On the nights when Miles sat with the lights off and didn't move, Bram would come and press his shoulder into Miles's calf and stay there until Miles got up. Not comfort as gesture, comfort as refusal to leave. The man on the porch was named August Pritchard. He was 83 years old, and he weighed 146 pounds, and he had lived in that house, a white clapboard 2-story with green shutters and a cellar that his father had dug by hand in 1951, for all but 7 of those 83 years. He had served as a coal mine inspector for the state of West Virginia for 34 years, a job that required a particular kind of steadiness, the willingness to go into dark places and tell men with mortgages and families the truth about what he found there, whether or not the truth was welcome. He had a handshake that people in Sutton still remembered, not for its grip but for the way he made eye contact during it. Full and direct, as if the handshake were a contract being notarized. His wife Doris had kept an enormous kitchen garden behind the house for 40 years and had grown tomatoes that won the Braxton County Fair 3 times, and which August ate with nothing but salt, because Doris said the tomato was the thing and everything else was commentary. Doris had been gone for 6 years. August had stopped entering the tomatoes in the fair. He had not stopped growing them. He had a daughter, Renee, who lived in Charleston. She called every Sunday. He had a son, Darnell, who had moved to Pittsburgh 18 years ago and called at Christmas and birthdays with a precision that suggested the calls were scheduled in a calendar, and the calendar did not have room for anything. Unscheduled. And he had a grandson, Tyler, who was Darnell's son, and who had called August 3 weeks ago, not to check on him, but to talk about the property, specifically about what August intended to do with it, specifically about whether August had thought about the value of the land, specifically about whether a man of 83 really needed all that acreage and that house, and whether some arrangement might be made that would benefit everyone, including August, Who, Tyler said, seemed to him to be getting to a stage of life where simpler might be easier. August had told Tyler that he was familiar with stages of life, and that simpler was not a word he trusted from a mouth that hadn't earned it. He had hung up and not answered the phone, the 2 times Tyler called back. That had been 3 weeks ago. Since then, 2 things had happened. The first was a certified letter from a property management firm in Charleston, explaining that on behalf of a client they were interested in making an offer on the Pritchard property at Holler Creek, Sutton, and that time might be a factor given current market conditions, and that they hoped August would review the enclosed materials at his earliest convenience. The second was the flood. Miles parked above the waterline and got Bram on a lead and went up the slope to the porch. The man watched him come without moving. "You need to evacuate, sir," Miles said. "The road's gone. Water's still rising." "I know what the water's doing," August said. "I've watched it do it before. Not like this," Miles said. "Before your time," August said. He looked at Bram. The dog was sitting at heel, calm, looking back. "What's his name?" "Bram. Brahms. Like the composer." "Just Bram," Miles said. "But he doesn't object to the association." August looked at the dog for another moment, then looked at Miles, and something in the assessment changed. Not softened, but expanded, the way a man's opinion expands when he finds an unexpected data point. "Come up then," he said. "You're getting wet." The inside of the house was warm from a wood stove in the corner of the front room, and dry, and full of the specific density of a house that has been lived in for a very long time by the same person. Books on 3 walls, a roll-top desk with pigeonholes stuffed with papers, photographs in frames that had been moved so many times for so many years that the wall behind each one was slightly lighter than the rest. Doris's garden tools hung on a board inside the back door, organized, clean, used until recently. August had kept them clean. That detail alone told Miles something about the man he was sitting with. Bram moved through the room without being directed and stopped at the door to the cellar. He sat down. He did not look back at Miles. "What's in the cellar?" Miles asked. 40 years of life," August said. He crossed to the cellar door and opened it, and the smell of damp earth and old wood came up the stairs. Bram went to the top step and looked down and then came back to August and sat beside him. "Doris's canning jars, my inspection records. Things I have not sorted because there is no one to sort them with, and doing it alone felt like closing a chapter I'm not ready to close." He said it plainly, without self-pity, in the way a man states a fact he has already made peace with. "The water will reach the cellar floor by morning if the river doesn't turn," Miles said. "I know," August said. "That's why I haven't gone to bed." "You're staying to watch it." "I'm staying," August said, "because if I leave, I'm not sure I come back. Not because the water won't recede. Because once you leave a place in an emergency, someone else starts making decisions about it. And at 83 in this county with a grandson who has already sent me paperwork from Charleston." He stopped. He looked at the cellar door. "I know how this goes. Have you ever known someone like August? Someone who stayed, not out of stubbornness, but out of the knowledge that leaving meant surrender. If that person is still in your life, check on them after this. If they're not, tell me their name in the comments. They deserve to be remembered." Miles sat down. He had been on his feet for 6 hours, and his boots were wet through, and he had 4 missed calls from the volunteer coordinator, and the drive back to Sutton proper was currently underwater. He looked at Bram, who had returned to his position by the cellar door, and was lying down now, chin on his paws, watching the door the way he watched things he'd already decided about. "Tell me about the paperwork," Miles said. What came out over the next hour, with the rain against the windows and the river audible below the rise, and Bram shifting twice to rest his head on August's knee without being asked, was a story that August had not told anyone in full because there was no one he trusted with the whole of it. Tyler had called 3 weeks ago. Then the letter came. Then, 4 days ago, a man had knocked on August's door. Not from the property firm, he said, but from a development company out of Morgantown that was working with the property firm. And who had heard that August might be considering his options? And who wanted to make sure August understood the timeline? Because there were other parties interested in the Holler Creek corridor, and the window for a favorable arrangement was not indefinite. August had not opened the door past the chain. The man had left a card under it. 2 days ago, Tyler had called again. Not from his Pittsburgh number August didn't recognize. Tyler had said that he'd been talking to some people who could help August get the most out of the land, and that Renee agreed it was worth discussing, and that he just wanted what was best for his grandfather, and that the flood coming might actually be an opportunity in terms of deciding what August really needed to hold on to and what he might be ready to release. August had said, "I'll hold on to what I decide to hold on to, same as I always have." Tyler had said, "Grandpa, you're 83. August had hung up, and then the flood had come, and August had put on his rain slicker and gone to stand on his porch because he wanted to be visible to it. Because standing on your own porch in a flood is a form of testimony. Miles was quiet for a moment. The wood stove crackled. Outside, the river said what rivers say when they have more room than usual. "I had a man in my unit," Miles said. "Staff Sergeant Roy Pemberton, out of Welch, McDowell County. Coal family, same as mine. He used to say that the land in this state has been negotiated away from people who built their lives on it for 150 years, and that the negotiation always starts with someone explaining why it would actually be better for you." He paused. "He didn't make it back from Helmand. I think about what he would have done with his family's land now. I think he'd have stood on the porch too." August looked at him. For the first time, something in the old man's face shifted from assessment to recognition. "You're not here because of the evacuation order," August said. "I am," Miles said, "but I'm also just here." At 11:47, headlights came up the Holler Creek access road, the one Miles had come in on, which was above the water, a white SUV with out-of-county plates. It parked. No one got out for 2 minutes. Bram stood up. He walked to the front window and looked out, and the sound that came from him was low and sustained, not sharp, a continuous note like a held chord, which meant he had already made a determination and was waiting for the situation to confirm it. "Expecting someone?" Miles asked. "No," August said, and his voice had changed. Flattened, the way a voice flattens when the thing you've been bracing for has arrived sooner than you expected. Tyler Pritchard was 34, broad-shouldered, in a jacket that was too light for a West Virginia flood night, and boots that had never been near mud. He came through the door without knocking. The door was unlocked because August had never locked it in 83 years and was not going to start. And he looked at his grandfather with the expression of someone who has decided that whatever they're about to do is actually an act of love and has been working hard to keep that belief intact. He looked at Miles. He looked at Bram. Bram did not bark. He positioned himself between Tyler and August, who was standing beside the roll-top desk, and the growl had not stopped. It had simply become quieter, which in Bram's vocabulary was not de-escalation. It was the difference between a warning and a decision. "Who is this?" Tyler said. "Miles Decker," Miles said. "Volunteer Relief Coordinator, Braxton County. Your grandfather chose not to evacuate. I chose to stay with him." Tyler looked at Bram. Bram looked at Tyler with the focused, patient attention of an animal that has already done all its calculating. "Grandpa," Tyler said, turning to August, "this is exactly the situation I've been trying to explain to you. A flood. In this house. At your age, you could have. 4 days ago, a man knocked on my door. You told me Renee agreed. I called Renee this evening. She didn't know anything about a meeting with property people. She didn't know anything about any arrangement." He said it without heat, with the same directness he'd used in coal mines for 34 years. The voice of a man who has looked at what's in front of him and named it accurately. "You used her name." Tyler's mouth opened and then closed. "You used your grandmother's name," August said. "It was quieter than everything before it. You mentioned what she would have wanted. On that phone call, he used her name. The room held it. Tyler's hand, which had been gesturing, went still. He looked at the photographs on the walls, the garden tools on the board inside the back door, the ceramic bowl on the kitchen shelf that still had Doris's handwriting on a piece of tape underneath it, her tomato paste, her hand, still there. "You have no idea what she would have wanted," August said. "She would have wanted me in this house." Miles stepped forward slightly, not to intervene, not to escalate, just to become visible. He opened the notebook he carried on every relief shift. He had written dates in it, the date of Tyler's first call, the date the certified letter arrived. He'd found the envelope on the kitchen counter, the date of the knock on the door, the date of the second call from the West Virginia number. The dates formed a timeline that had a shape, and the shape was not the shape of concern for an elderly man. It was the shape of acceleration. "Here's what I'm going to do," Miles said, and his voice was level, the voice of a man who has been in situations where losing control was a luxury no one could afford. "I'm going to give you the number for the West Virginia Elder Rights Hotline and for the Braxton County Legal Aid Office. I'm also going to note in my relief coordinator log that a visitor arrived at this property at 11:47 p.m. during a declared flood emergency, and I'm going to include the plate number of that vehicle." He paused. "And I'm going to let your grandfather tell me whether there's anything else he'd like included." Two other volunteers had come up behind Tyler, Miles's colleagues who'd come looking for him when he didn't answer the radio. They stood in the doorway, witnesses to a room that had tipped. Tyler looked at Bram. Bram had not moved from his position between Tyler and August. He did not move now. He watched Tyler cross back to the door. He watched him step through it. He watched the door close, and then, only when the headlights turned and moved back down the access road, Bram walked to August and sat down beside him, and the growl stopped. August put his hand on the dog's head. "Good dog," he said very quietly. The water peaked at 2 a.m. and began to drop by 4. Miles sat with August through most of it, and when the wood stove needed feeding, August fed it because it was his house and his stove, and he knew how. They talked about Roy Pemberton, who had grown up 40 miles from Sutton in a county that looked like this. One, who had believed something about this land that a lot of people who'd grown up on it believed. They talked about Doris's tomatoes, which August said she would have entered again this year if she'd been there, because the vines had come in strong and the soil in the raised beds was still good. They talked about the cellar, which had taken on 4 inches of water by morning but no more, and whose contents, the jars, the records, had survived on the shelving August had built high on purpose 30 years ago, because he had seen this flood before and he had built for the possibility of seeing it again. Renee Pritchard drove up from Charleston that morning. She came through the door and went directly to her father and held him for a long time. Then she looked at Miles and said simply, "Thank you for staying." Miles said, "Your father made it easy." Renee contacted an elder law attorney in Charleston that week. The property firm's letter was reviewed. The development company's involvement was documented. Tyler did not call again. Whether the legal matter would move forward was still being worked out months later. These things moved slowly, and slowly was fine because August was still in his house and still growing tomatoes and had no particular urgency about the pace of anything. The county did a repair on the cellar wall in October. Some of the canning jars were lost. Most were not. August relabeled the ones that survived in handwriting that was still clear, still direct, the way all his communication had always been. On a Sunday in November, clear and cold, the ridge above the hollow gone bright with the last of the color, Miles drove back out to Holler Creek with Bram, and they sat on the porch with August and drank coffee and watched the Elk River moving easy and low below the rise. Nothing like what it had been, just a river going where rivers go. Bram lay at August's feet. August didn't comment on it. He had already decided somewhere in the middle of a flood night that the dog was welcome. There are moments that do not feel like coincidence. Miles did not call himself a man of faith exactly, but he understood, sitting on that porch, why people reach for that language. The idea that the route you take, the moment a dog lifts his head in the car, the rain-slicked road that leads you past a lighted house where a man has decided to stay, that maybe these things arrange themselves around something larger than the sum of their parts. He had driven past this road before. He had not turned in before. He had simply turned in. What Miles Decker did that flood night in Sutton, West Virginia, was not extraordinary in the way we usually mean that word. He had the same hours anyone else had. He saw a man standing on a porch, and he turned in. Staff Sergeant Roy Pemberton had said once that the land gets taken from people one reasonable conversation at a time. Miles thought now that maybe it gets kept one unreasonable act of staying at a time. One volunteer who parks when everyone else is driving away. One dog who will not move from where he's standing. One old man who already knew the flood was coming and built his shelves high enough 30 years ago because he intended to be there for the next one. He simply stayed. This story is for everyone who has refused to leave the thing that belongs to them. Not out of stubbornness, but out of the knowledge that some things are worth the flood. And for everyone who has stayed beside them through the night when they had no particular reason to accept that it was the right thing to do. Is there someone in your life, like August Pritchard, a parent, a grandparent, someone holding on to something the world keeps trying to explain they should let go? Leave their name below. I read every comment, and this section deserves to be full of people who stayed. Every story on this channel is about choosing not to look away. If that means something to you, subscribe. There are more to tell, and you'll want to be here for the next one. Which moment in the story stayed with you longest? I'll see you in the comments.